most of us have been around here in Chico for some time to watch Life in Chico play through and notice the changes and wonder about the future, and we're still doing it. And so it's going to be, I think, especially interesting today to hear from Mike Wolcott, editor of the Chico Enterprise Record. And again, I just brought this Friday issue of the paper down today just to hold up, just to kind of demonstrate to all of us there what a cornerstone, what a foundation stone the Enterprise Record has been here in this community for my entire lifetime, really, from about the end of World War II, when two Chico papers combined to give us today's Chico Enterprise Record. And again, before I introduce our speaker, just a touch of background on the Chico Enterprise Record. For really, this paper is the direct descendant of the oldest paper published here in Butte County, along with a very early second paper here in Chico. The first real newspaper here in Butte County was the Butte Record, first published in 1853 in Bidwell Bar. When Bidwell Bar, I believe, had become the county seat over just a handful of years for Butte County, it was really maybe the most important mining community there that had sprung up over those first few years of the gold rush. And that's where John Bidwell had found his big strike of gold on the middle fork of the Feather River. Bidwell Bar now underwater there for Lake Oroville. And so the paper began there under this man named George Crissett, who was really Butte County's most distinguished newspaper man there over its first 50 years. Crissett would continue to publish newspapers until the latter part of the 1900s there. But in 1853, he begins the Butte Record there at Bidwell Bar, and then shortly after, 1856-57, he moves the paper to Oroville. Bidwell Bar is already beginning to slump there. Oroville now is gushing there to quickly become one of California's biggest communities there as the head of the supply there for this vast mining area there on the Feather. And so Oroville was on the upswing, and this George Crissett took the Butte Record there to Oroville, and then he'd move it to Chico in 1873-74 and began to publish there with that same Butte Record. And so, but 5 years previous to 1873-74, a second newspaper had sprung up here in Chico, the Northern Enterprise. And that would be the first paper to carry that Enterprise name. And so for the rest of the 19th century, both papers would continue to publish here in Chico. Ownership would shift a time or two or three or four. The names would bounce around and shift, but they'd always hold at least the words Enterprise and Record through those years and into the early 20th century, when really the Chico Record and the Chico Enterprise would merge out of the previous century and really began to be Chico's two prominent newspapers for the next 50 years, let's say 1905 through 1947. The Record would be a morning paper, and the Enterprise would be an evening paper. And they would be competing against each other with a little different political position. And they would carry those positions there through most of that time until the World War II era, when A.W. Bramwell as a young man, would acquire ownership of the Enterprise Publishing Company, and he would then acquire the record and merge the two papers, and the first edition of the Chico Enterprise record would be in December of 1948. And so really, again, just having grown up here in Chico, I really so well remember the place this paper had in our own household there. Every day it would be out there, out in the front lawn, and my parents always would look through it, and of course I would too. I'd just simply go to the sports page, which is really the only page I could really identify with, and I was a big sports fan there, and so always going to the sports page. And again, the paper was a very substantial size there at that point, and there were all these parts to the paper. What did you call them?
Sections.
Sections, and it covered the whole Chico story, all of the doings around town, the marriages that were going to happen, all of that in these different sections of the paper. And it, again, was just the real lifeblood of this community. And again, it's been such a prominent part of our whole American story, the newspaper, and the latitude, we call it freedom, to publish what you want here and put it out there, and the ability of the readership to read and, oh yeah, okay, and circulate that information. It's been such a primary reason why we've seen such a cultural growth here in the United States, I think, in our American story. So again, it's going to be especially, I think, yeah, it's certainly pertinent and even a great challenge to retain some credible news circulation in our culture. And we've all seen this shift of the computer world and now these little handheld devices where information and pictures just come at us constantly, and the source and the credibility of some of that can be questionable. And so we're all, I think, challenged to try to sort through it. And so today we're going to hear from Mike Wolcott. He's only the fourth editor to hold that position with the Chico Enterprise record since 1947-48. And he was born here in the North Valley, grew up over on the west side of the valley there in Flournoy in Tehama County, had his first published newspaper article, I think, back in 1976 with the Corning Observer, drifted down to the Bay Area where he really spent most of his journalistic career down there, and then has come back up here and now is the present editor of the Chico Enterprise record. So again, it's a special moment here to introduce Mike Wolcott.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I happened to bump into Mr. Mulholland back here before we spoke, and he was kind enough to point out that I guess a little over maybe 4.5 years ago, my predecessor, David Little, came and spoke on the history of the newspaper and newspapers' roles here. And then he added a little afterthought, which was, and you know, David announced he was resigning 3 days later. So I'm not sure if you're trying to put a hint at me, Bob, or what the point was. But no, it was, I'm honored. David first hired me to work at the Enterprise Record many years ago in a role that I'll get into here in a little bit. But honored to be here. I love working for newspapers. It's what I've done almost my entire life in a good variety of roles. I've seen a lot of changes through the years, obviously, as those of you who read our newspaper, and I do thank you, all of you who read the newspaper. I think newspapers have done a horrible job most of my lifetime of letting their customers know how much they appreciate the fact that you read our paper. So I vowed never to make that mistake, so I do thank you all for your support of this. You heard a great history of the background of our paper and how we became the Enterprise Record, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that other than noting that we will be celebrating our 170th birthday a little later this year. So we're talking about some different things we can do with that, and we are happy to still be here. And my history in newspapers is, as was just noted, I had my first byline in June 1976 when I was a senior in high school, at Corning High School. And I like to tell the joke and often begin with that I grew up in a sheep farm, 5th generation, land that was homesteaded back in the 1880s. And the first time I saw my dad castrate a lamb the old-fashioned way, that was the day I knew I wanted to be a sports writer, which I was blessed to do for many years. And it was in the 1970s and 1980s when I first met David Little. We were both starting as sports writers in this area then, and crossed paths then and again many years later. But at the time I started, Corning had 2 newspapers. Wow. We had a weekly and we had a daily that was 5 days a week, all local copy. We bragged of being the smallest daily newspaper in the United States, which circulation-wise I think we probably were, but we didn't run any Associated Press. We filled 4 to 6 pages every day with all local copy. Wow. And there was also a weekly newspaper. It was called the Corning Graphic, which was printed by company headquartered in Willows, which also did weekly papers in Willows and Las Molinas and Orland. I think they might have had one in Gridley too. And a couple of those towns had daily newspapers too. And it was, you look back and you think, wow, how did we get from there to here? And obviously there's a lot of reasons. But it was a fun time to get into this job because every one of these towns had their own sports writer. We'd run into each other through the years at different events. Some of them I ended up crossing paths with many years later in the Bay Area too. So you look back at then and what we did and the size of staffs and what we're doing now, and I'll just kind of spend a couple minutes kind of telling you my story and then get into kind of the topic of the day. But I went to work full-time at the Corning Daily Observer in 1980. And it was an incredible experience because it was not only a daily newspaper, we were also the Western Union office and the Salvation Army headquarters. So on a given day, I might literally be delivering a MoneyGram across town and or taking a care package or filling out some paperwork for some different people who came in. And we did everything there. If you worked at the Corning Observer, you would probably learn how to develop your own film and print your own photos and how the typesetting would happen then. And working in the darkroom, I literally did everything there except run the press at some point or another. And it was just kind of a great way to learn different aspects of the business, even in that small town at that time. As the years went along, I worked at the Red Bluff Daily News as the sports editor for a couple of years and made my way over to the coast where I worked at the Eureka Times-Standard for about 4 years as sports editor. And to me, that was going to the big city. You go from Flournoy to Corning to Eureka, where all of a sudden I'm covering Humboldt State football and basketball and Humboldt Crabs baseball in the summer and stock car racing, and they had boxing. And it was similar to Chico in those days in a lot of ways as far as the newspaper and the staff and what we did. And all of a sudden, I'm the sports editor and I'm getting the complaints. Like growing up in Corning, I used to wonder, why does the Enterprise Record hate Corning so much? Why don't we get more headlines? Why are they so biased for Pleasant Valley and Chico or whatever? Well, years later, I'm in Eureka, and every day people are asking, why do you hate Fortuna? Why do you hate Arcata? Why are you so biased for Eureka? I'm like, so I wanted to pick up the phone and call Ted Blofsky and Skip Rager and apologize at that point because I understood what they were going through. But from there, I was fortunate enough in 1990 to be hired at the Hayward Daily Review, which at the time was the flagship newspaper for the Alameda Newspaper Group. A couple years after that, that company bought the Oakland Tribune. And in what became a trend that hasn't stopped to this day, the owners of that newspaper group are, by extension down the line a bit, the same company that owns us today. They decided some consolidation was in order. So 5 newspapers, I worked in the sports department, And we had one staff basically that put out the sports section for all 5 of those newspapers. It was the Daily Review, the Oakland Tribune, Fremont Argus, Tri-Valley Herald in Pleasanton, and the Alameda Times-Star. And there's another place. Alameda had 2 daily newspapers in those days, and that's where the Raiders trained when they were in Oakland. And my God, the great stories they had to tell in those days. So that continued. I became sports editor there about 5 years later. And after that, about a year, I got offered a job at the Contra Costa Times up in Walnut Creek. Great newspaper. Fantastic newspaper. And I remember being the deputy sports editor there, and we traveled with Cal and Stanford and the A's and Giants and Sharks and 49ers and Raiders and every team. And I remember in the late 1990s, we had 52 people on our sports staff of the Contra Costa Times. And we thought we were understaffed. It's like, if only we had more people, we could do more things. But we had a sports editor. I was the deputy sports editor. We had 4 other assistant sports editors. We had full-time columnists. It was the golden days, and we didn't know it. You know, like a lot of things, we just didn't know it. Around that same time, this thing called the internet came along. Familiar with it? And even then, we started noticing changes in how newspapers were going to operate. We'd have, as I know the Enterprise Record did many years ago, we might have 6, 8, 10, 12 pages of classified advertising some days. Mm-hmm. Those all became free posts on Craigslist. I think it was 1996, I was at the Contra Costa Times. It was still owned by the Dean and Margaret Lesher family. Margaret owned it at the time. And she sold that newspaper to Knight Ridder for $365 million. Whoa! It's not remembered as a good deal because that's about the time newspapers started taking a turn. But we were consolidating even then a little more. Our sports staff was like the Alameda newspaper group. We were putting out 5 sports sections a day, 5 newspapers out of that office. And skipping ahead a little bit, I mentioned 52 people on our sports staff. For the past 9 years in Chico, we've been putting 12 daily newspapers out of our office with about half that many people doing everything. So that's jumping ahead a little, but I went from there. My childhood dream growing up out there in Flournoy was I wanted to work for the San Francisco Chronicle someday. I would ride my bike about a mile down to the Flournoy store. They got 3 copies of the Chronicle every morning. I couldn't wait to get there and get the paper, and I'd read it, and I wondered, gee, the Giants played last night. Why isn't that game in the paper today? Well, deadlines. Now I know. If the game goes too late, they don't get in. So I realized my childhood dream. I did that for 8 years. And I think my first day at the Chronicle, we had, it was around the time of the merger with the Examiner, and we had around 600 employees. And my last day there, I think we had 180. And the Chronicle, for a while, was losing $1 million a week. Nobody knew what to do. This is the flagship paper of the Hearst Corporation, and they certainly didn't want to go out of business, but they had this huge, still do, this huge 3-story building at the corner of Mission and 5th Street in downtown San Francisco. But they got the bright idea of taking those of us who still worked here, putting us all in one corner of the room, and renting the rest of the building out. Suddenly the Chronicle was profitable again. And I might mention at the Enterprise Record, we have a nice 10,000 square foot room right in front of our building, if anybody's looking for some space there now. But we did that for, and to this day, I still have a lot of friends that work at the Chronicle, and they're all basically crowded together in one room, about the size of this building, I'd say. And the rest of the building is rented out to other companies as newspapers continue their fight to survive. In about 2012, I was living in the East Bay, Danville, and driving to my job at the Chronicle one day. And it took me 2 hours and 20 minutes to go 20 miles. And that was the day it hit me, I think it's time to go home. I think I lived my Bay Area dream and had the great experience I always wanted to have, and I'm just going to go home. And a few months later, I moved back up here. I'll be honest, the other reason I moved up here was the woman who's now my wife. That played a bigger part too. She works right over here at Chico State. And I came up here and thought, what am I going to do now? And I got a sales job for a while. And I kept having this voice in my head saying, you should reach out to David a little and just see what's going on with newspapers here. So I did that, and we met and had lunch. And that's when he told me that at the Enterprise Record they were going to start something called the Northern California Design Center. The idea was our company, which is Media News Group, wanted to further consolidate a lot of their operations. So instead of all of the newspapers they own in Northern California having their own copy desk, their own page designers, and eventually their own press, they're going to consolidate all of this in Chico. Hire one staff to put all those papers out. And I went home that night and told my wife, I thought I was out, but looks like I'm back in. And I was hired as the deputy director of that department, became the director about a year later. And we started that in March. We started putting our paper out and all the others in March 2014. So we're closing in on 9 years of that. But every day in Chico, we have a staff of, right now it's 18 page designers who also do some copy editing as time allows. But every day in Chico, we produce the Eureka Times-Standard, the Marin Independent Journal, Santa Cruz Sentinel, Monterey County Herald, Vallejo Times-Herald, Vacaville Reporter, Woodland Daily Democrat, Lake County Record B, Ukiah Daily Journal, the Fort Bragg Advocate, which is a weekly newspaper, Red Bluff Daily News, the other half of our paper, which is the Oroville Mercury Register. And I think I got them all. That should add up to 12. But we design and edit those in Chico every day. And as the years went along, at one point every one of these newspapers had their own press. And I've worked for a few of them, and I remember seeing the press in each of those buildings. Right now, Chico is the only newspaper, to my knowledge, other than I think Marysville still has their press. But we're the only paper north of the Bay Area that has its own press. So we not only print about half of those newspapers I just mentioned on our press here in Chico, we also print other papers that don't have a press anymore. We print the Reading Record Searchlight on our press. We print the Reno Gazette-Journal on our press for the past year. Every night somebody drives their truck from Chico to Reno, and so far they've succeeded every time. I'm not sure how, given the weather and Donner Summit, but they've always found a way. So we've got a press that has, it went in with the building in 1986. I was told recently it was one of only 3 in the country of that kind of press still operating. And it was built to print, hundreds of thousands of copies of newspapers a day. I don't think it was built to stop and start as many times as it is because of all the, but knock on wood, it's performed well. And from about 3 o'clock on, our press is running every day, printing all of these different papers. Well, one of the papers that we do own that we print is the Eureka Times-Standard. And so every night, a guy leaves Eureka in a truck, drives to Willits, and somebody else leaves Chico in a truck and drives to Willits, and the 2 drivers trade trucks. And that's how the people in Eureka get their newspaper now. So I think I like to drive. I think that'd be a fun job. So when I interview people from Chico State who are working at the Orion and maybe want to consider a career in newspapers, and they ask me, well, I'm worried about the future of the industry. How is it safe? Am I going to have a job in 5 years or 10 years? And I tell them, in Chico, we're about as safe as it gets for all those reasons I just told you. There is no newspaper is going to find a more, I'll use the word efficient, substitute it if you want. No newspaper is going to find a more efficient way of printing their newspaper or getting it designed or put together than we're doing here by doing so many of them at once. So I ended up in this job running this design center, doing all of this work for these different areas, which was a lot like I did about half the years I was in the Bay Area. I was either a writer or an editor or a columnist or running copy desks, this sort of thing down there. And I was just having a ball. I thought I would never stop doing this job unless I got the chance maybe to be the editor of one of these newspapers. I never thought it would be Chico. I figured David and I would ride this out until we were both ready to call it a career. So I was pretty surprised in summer of 2018 when our publisher pulled me aside and said, you know, David's retiring at the end of the year. Would you be interested in taking his place and also continuing your current job? I was so excited by the first half of that, I don't think I maybe listened to the second part close enough, but I've got a great, basically, deputy who's running most of the design center work now. Her name's Giovanna Garcia, Chico State graduate, just does a fantastic job for me in that end. But David's last couple of months were exhausting, to put it kindly. I remember we were going to announce in the paper on November 10th, 2018 that I was going to be the new editor. Well, we remember what happened November 8th, 2018, and we all kind of forgot about, for obvious reasons, worrying about that announcement for a while. But they really went out, and I know David has said it this way, and I want to make sure I don't misspeak on his behalf. But I remember asking him, what was it like those, your final 7 or 8 weeks where I don't think you slept? And he goes, I don't mean this to come out wrong, but it was fun. It was fun in that it reminded me of why I got into this business. The crazy hours. He said, there wasn't an hour on the clock of the day when at some point or another I wasn't here in the building, be it 8 in the morning or 2 in the morning or 11 at night. And I was never the only person here. We had a lot of journalists from the Bay Area who came up to help us cover the campfire, and a bigger staff then than we have even now. But he was able to go out and just really practicing the high standards of journalism and doing what he loved to do that way. And we kind of had a running joke through the years. I would see him in his office and say, wow, you look tired. And he'd say, yeah, I am. Now when I run into him uptown, he'll say, wow, Mike, you look tired. I'll say, yeah, I am. And you look 10 years younger than you did 5 years ago. But that's kind of how we got to where we are in Chico and the different things we do. I've kind of given the same talk in a way a few times to Rotary clubs and different groups around town. But I had an experience a couple days ago that was pretty powerful for me and kind of recharged the batteries to a degree. Well, once a year in Sacramento, well, since COVID, they stopped for a couple years, but they have the California Newspaper Publisher Association has a conference, and they usually have a few guest speakers that come in. And the topic this year was, how does the media basically regain our trust? And back to back, the first 2 speakers the day I was there, one was Brian Karem from CNN, White House correspondent, and the second was Bill Barr, Donald Trump's Attorney General. So, and the third was D.D. Myers, Bill Clinton's former press secretary. So we got a lot of different great viewpoints, and they didn't hold back. I mean, every one of them, especially Karem and Barr, just let newspapers have it. And Brian Karem is himself a former newspaper guy, started as a sports writer, just like a lot of us did. And he pointed out the current figures show the media basically has a 16% credibility rating. Now, my first byline happened about 3 years after Watergate. At the time, journalists, boy, that was an esteemed profession. Integrity, everybody wanted to be a journalist. We wanted to get into this business. We wanted to report what was going on. And now you'll hear people get into the business, they want to change the world. Two different things. But Karen spent a lot of time saying, how do we get to 16% credibility? How do we get it back? And the thing he kept hammering on us, which I say in a way to my staff, is you want to be fair, supply the facts. Get the facts right. Quit trying to tell me you're trying to report the truth. You're trying to report your version of the truth. It's like in the Indiana Jones movie. You want truth, philosophy is 2 doors down. Report the facts. And I tell people I hire that work for us a couple of things. One is, you got to love this job to do it, because you'll be miserable if you don't. You absolutely have to love it. And number 2, our job is 2 things. Get it right, be fair. If we screw up, admit it, run a correction, fix our story online. The internet has given us that. We can at least correct a permanent record that way. But get it right and be fair. Corporate ownership, and the figure is, I believe, 6 companies own 90% of the newspapers still in existence. Our company owns a couple hundred of those all over the country. I'll hear a lot, well, does your company tell you what to print in the opinion page or what stories to run in the paper? And I say, no. I mean, my first 40 years in the business, I saw a publisher in the newsroom 4 times. 3 times was to announce the paper had been sold. The 4th was in the Bay Area when there was a Pulitzer nomination. But those were the only 4 times, all the years in the Bay Area, or my first few years up here, that I saw a publisher. Now I see my publisher every day because we're involved in a lot of things. But and Karam said something that just really hit home to me. He goes, these people that own newspapers now, they're not biased for the Democrats or the Republicans. They're biased for money. Right. And he basically, in a room full of publishers, basically said, shame on all of you. Every year we get a number to make, and we're going to make it regardless of how small the staff gets as a result. David told me his first day as editor, there were 43 people in the newsroom at Chico. My first day as editor, we had 15, and now we have 8. We've been on 8 for a couple of years, and we've held well. We're still profitable, but I think I'm guilty of being defensive when people criticize somebody who works for me because I know how hard they work. And I'll say things like, I literally can't be awake any more than I am. I don't know how much more work we can do. But we're trying. And that being said, I think it is important. And I've had exchanges, I know, with some of the people in here. Some have been better than others. I try to maintain, civility. I fail too. I feel bad about that. I rededicate it myself every day. But a majority of the conversations I have with our readers are good. And I usually come away learning something, and I think sometimes our readers do too. But if there's one point I want to make sure everybody at least understands about something I think here, I do care. I want to get it right. I love this profession deeply. I love Chico deeply. When you grow up and go into Corning High School, Chico is where you want to be. And it's that way all up and down the valley, and for me it still is. And we want to get it right, and we want to produce a newspaper that's engaging and offers different points of view and doesn't automatically say, oh, they're doing this, so we're going to take this side. One of the changes has been, I've talked about David a little. We also had two people who had been with us about 40 years apiece. We had Steve Schoonover and Laura Ursany. And between those two and David, that's 100 years of institutional knowledge. All went out the door within about a year of each other, leaving me, who, been back up here a few years now, and nobody else really to write editorials or provide content that way. So I did a couple of different things. Every year I try to have somebody in the staff join me in the editorial board. And as of about, I guess it's been closing in on 3 years now, once a year we select 2, 3, however many members of the community to serve on our editorial board. And we've been real lucky. The first year we had John Blacklock, former Butte County CAO and longtime trustee at Butte College, Silver Dollar Fair Board. Wealth of institutional knowledge, very fair-minded man. This past year we had 3 people we liked so much we couldn't decide. We just said, well, let's have all 3. So we had Jeff Lebowski, neurosurgeon over here at Enloe. Mike Dunbar, former chief of police, and also former chief of police in Santa Cruz. And for most of the term, we've also had Chris Boyle, realtor from Paradise, who was driven out by the campfire and sound in Chico now. I never, as we interview, it's kind of an application process. I never ask the question, are you a liberal or conservative? I'm not looking for that so much as I'm looking for somebody that can have a discussion about the issues and different sides of it. Because if we're going to take an editorial that says, we support Valley's Edge, we want to at least be able to try to get the opposing side right. and to have their voice in it. Regardless of what the topic is, we want to make sure we present it both sides, and to have that, we got to have a mix of opinions on the editorial board. So in about a month, we're going to start looking for new people. I basically tell all of them, you're sentenced to a term of 1 year, and beyond that, we'll be looking for some more community members. And it's not a writing position. What we do is we talk about once a week just on what's going on, and we select our hits and misses, which run in the paper every Saturday, and then we discuss other editorial ideas. So that's one kind of change that we've had there, is we, just looking for different voices. I hear a lot, and I want to open it up for questions soon. That's always my favorite part of this, is I'll get a lot of questions about letters to the editor. People will ask, how do you select which ones you run? I go, well, I don't. I mean, we run the letters we get. We're one of the few papers I've worked at that does that. I go, as long as they're written to length, try to keep the name calling and that sort of thing to a minimum, and just follow our basic rules. And you get one per calendar week is my rule on those. We run all the ones we get, and that comes as a surprise sometimes. People might think, oh boy, I see a lot more letters opposed to Valley Edge than in favor of it. You must be trying to, hold that side of it down. Like, well, no, that's what we get. Or people will ask, why does Patrick Newman get so many letters to the editor in the paper? I want to see more letters from other people. And I'll say, okay, that sounds great, but more other people need to write letters for that to happen. I can't run letters we don't get. And Patrick's smart. I mean, his timing is exquisite. He knows he gets one letter a week, and he knows just when to submit it, so it'll run again next Sunday. He's on quite a roll right now. But his, and we've got, several letters. There are a lot of people in here today I know who write letters to the editor very often, and we thank you for those. It's there's a lot of, that's probably the toughest part of my job, is deciding, okay, there's an opinion, and then there's the fact. Then there's that area in the middle where somebody's interpretation of the facts might lead to a different opinion than certainly I would agree with, or maybe even that most people would agree with. But I still see letters to the editor as a bit of a town square, where different opinions can come out there, and other people are open to reply to that and write a rebuttal. And I had a good episode yesterday with a man. He wanted to rebut what somebody had written about him a couple days before, and I said, okay, this started with your letter. He got a rebuttal. You wrote a rebuttal to his rebuttal, and then he wrote a rebuttal to your rebuttal to his rebuttal to your original letter. That's usually where I say, okay, that's enough. Let's move on and write a new letter. Well, but he actually got one more rebuttal than I did. I'm like, oh God, I hadn't thought of it that way. But I told him no anyway, but those are the only kind of letters I'll usually say no to. And if there are, I am more than ever saying, can you cite your source for that? And 2/3 of the time they'll say, well, I read it on the internet somewhere, I'll try to find it and get back to you. And then I usually don't hear back. Sometimes I do. But we do try. I put more thought into that probably than anything else we do, just because I want to keep it fair, I want to keep it factual, and I want people to get their opinion out there. Because something that Bill Barr, actually the other day at the convention, said this. He goes, we've lost our ability just to talk to one another. And Bill Barr's probably not the most nonpartisan name I could bring up for this conversation, but I think he's absolutely right. And I hear that a lot. President Biden this week brought that up. Just that when he first started in the Senate, him and Strom Thurmond would have lunch, or he'd have lunch with people all the time that he disagreed with, because they do business and then they talk. And now there's business and nobody talks. That's just not national government level. That's, here in Chico and the county and everywhere. And I think that's important, and I try to encourage that every way I can. One of the first things I did, and I think it's going back about March 2019, I wanted to meet some people in the community. So I wrote a column that said, hey, first 15 people that respond to this, you're invited to come in and have pizza, and we'll talk about anything you want. And I had 20 responses by the time I woke up that next morning. It was fantastic. And people came in, and we did that sort of thing a couple times. We've got some of the people here were there for those. And it was just fantastic because I remember leading up to it, people asking, wow, who's coming? And I listed some of the names, and I got these glares like, you're going to have those people in the same room with each other? Like, yeah, how bad could it be? I mean, well, now I look back and I think, wow, I think I was kind of nutty to try that, but it went really well. And you know, I know Bob's here, and I think he would vouch for this. There were good conversations. People were sitting side by side that you would normally in Chico not imagine talking to each other. And I left that day feeling, this is really good. We got to keep doing this. And then within a month or two, most of the people that were in the room were sniping at each other on Facebook again, and I felt kind of defeated. But I think it was just an important lesson to me that people need to talk, and I think newspapers play a role in that, in the town square type of arena. And without daily newspapers, there's about half as many now as there were 20 years ago. The George Santos story. Before that became national media, months before, a small newspaper in New York had that story. Nobody picked up on it. In the old days, that would have happened. Big newspapers had people whose part of their job was to see what the small newspapers were reporting. That would have got picked up 20 years ago. As amazing as it is in the era of the internet, news that small town reporters are picking up is not getting picked up by the bigger papers as much anymore. And so, but that's what we do. Nobody else is going to cover the Chico City Council meeting if not for your local newspaper and local TV station. Nobody else is going to cover high school sports. Nobody else is going to put together an annual high school sports banquet, which we hope to get going again this year after missing out on it for COVID the last couple years around. Who else is going to, put in the public records request? Although these days, that's probably not a fair thing to say. Lots of people put in public records requests now. But we're doing things, we're talking to people at the local level that when you lose your local newspaper, that's going to go away. Brian Karam told us on Wednesday, there's a county right outside of DC with 1 million people in it. Used to have a couple of their own newspapers. Now the Washington Post covers that 1 million person county with one reporter. Missing a lot of news. So I hear things like that and I think, okay, my little staff of 8 counting me, we're out there. We're working hard, and we hit, if I can brag for a minute, we hit the gold mine a couple months ago. I was having lunch with Evan Tuchinski, who's worked at the Chico News and Review for years. And I just asked him a question that's been on my mind for about a year, which is basically, would you consider jumping ship and coming over to us? And he said, well, what's the job? And I said, what do you want to do? And now he's with us. And he's just doing a fantastic job. A day or two after I had that conversation with Evan, Ed Booth, who was a sports writer for us back in the 90s, he reached out and said, I want to get back into this, but I want to do news. I'm thinking, okay, I just hired a guy who used to be the editor of the other newspaper in town, and now the son of the guy that used to be our editor wants to come to work here. I'm thinking, thank you. So our institutional knowledge is largely tied up in these 2 men that are rookies, in effect, our 2 newest hire. But it's fantastic because that's another thing newspapers lose these days. We're still working remotely. We're not working in our office. I hope someday that'll change, but it took about a month into COVID for our newspapers bean counters to figure out we're still getting newspapers out. Why are we paying all this money leasing offices? So that became the next thing that got cut. So we're all working remotely, which means the new reporters that we hire out at Chico State, they're not getting the peer support. It's not just me seeing them every day and trying to teach them things or this or that, versus talking to them on Zoom or the phone like I usually do. They're not hanging around with their coworkers. They're experienced veteran reporters and learning to the degree they used to. So we find reasons to get together every week and have coffee and just talk and just learn. And now with 2 new veterans in the staff, I'm more excited about the staff we have now and the things we're going to be able to do than I've been in a long time. And again, that's all to Evan and Ed. I'm thankful for that. So you know, I know the topic here was kind of newspapers, how they've changed, why they're still vital, and I think I've brought up some of the reasons why they think we're still vital. We've had a lot of coverage in our paper the last couple months over here at Chico State, and you know, really shocking allegations, and you know, those of you who read it, I don't think I need to go into it too much, but that was, I'll touch on this briefly and then open up for questions. We'd heard about that for a few months, and I had a reporter or two look into it, then that reporter would leave and get a different job, and we weren't getting very far, and for two reasons I came to the realization of we need a veteran, we need a heavyweight looking into this, and we don't really have that right now. So I reached out to Thomas Peel, who was a coworker of mine at the Bay Area News Group years ago, Pulitzer Prize winner, as good as it gets. If you ever see a movie about a dogged journalist, that's Tom Peel. This is a guy who would drive around with police tape in his car, so if he got to a scene first, he'd put police tape around it so none of the other reporters could get there. I mean, just a maniac in terms of it. So that was one factor. The other factor was, honestly, my wife works in that very department over there. That's a little close to home for me. And I'm thinking, I don't want any coverage of this story to have the appearance of being tainted because of that. And if somebody wants to look Tom Peel in the eye and say, you're biased, you know, knock yourself out, because he's the best of the best. So I reached out to Peel, I told him what we knew. His jaw dropped. About 20 minutes into it, he said, when did they finally fire the guy? I go, well, they didn't. He's still working there. In fact, they just named him as Professor of the Year after the part I just told you about. So he said, I'll take it. I'll do a story. I'll cover this. So we've worked with him, but I bring that up only for one reason, which was without reporters, without journalists, nothing would have ever changed. And there are other stories like that out there. We know, you know, we're going to keep working at it as hard as we can, because that's what we do. We love what we do. So I'll open up for questions now. I'm not sure how long I talked. Thank you. Sir.
From your perspective, what are some of the pros and the cons of your e-edition?
Did anybody here have trouble reading the e-edition now, still? Have you reached out to the people in our office? Because if you reach out to Janet Allinger, she'll help you. I mean, the first day that, I'll get to your question, I'm sorry, but the first day we made a switch recently in the format of that, I spent 2 days on the phone fielding complaints, and I don't know how it works, and I didn't know how to switch it or how to help people other than say, talk to Jeanette. But I like it in that, look, I'm an old school newspaper guy. I like to have my newspaper and look at it and hold it, and once it's printed, it's there. Nobody can go in and hack it or change it, or there's no allocations like that or anything. The e-edition and, you know, everything that's online, it was a switch for me as much as anybody. You know, the boy that used to ride his bike to the Flournoy store to buy the Chronicle every morning. But now I'm a fan, you know. I like it. Once I got onto it, I found it pretty easy to navigate. It's easy to go back. It's easier for me. This is the time of year where I go back through a whole year's worth of paper and decide what are we going to enter in the different contests this year. And I finally decided this year it's easier to do it with the e-edition than it is to go through a big box of papers and look through them all, which is the way I've done it every year up until now. So I like it. Was there a specific concern or something you don't like about it, or just curious your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm in the e-edition because I can't afford the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand, and and I hear that a lot. I know our subscription costs have gone up a lot through the years. Those of you who are still with us, I do thank you. The online, I understand there's a really good deal where you get full online access, and I think a Sunday paper delivered to your home that's very reasonably priced for that. Historically, the cost of your subscription from the newspaper world was supposed to cover the cost of getting the paper out there, period. If the newspapers broke even doing that, they were thrilled. But now with advertising, you know, in the toilet as it's been for a long time, that's seen as more part of the operating revenue than ever before. So, yes, sir.
Well, I can tell you the advantages and disadvantages of the e-edition for me.
Yeah.
I can be anywhere in the world and I can read the document. It's great.
Yeah.
One of the disadvantages is I don't have a paper to light my barbecue with.
Every day my dog runs down to the road, gets the paper, brings it back, and I look at it, and yep, it goes in my fireplace file. I do it too. So.
Well, I have to print it out.
Right.
But I love
There's a man back there, and I'll come to you next. Yes.
You mentioned that you edit and print the newspapers for like Eureka and Fort Bragg and Vallejo and Santa Cruz. Are there local writers on the
Yes. Yes, every one of those papers still has their own editor and their own staff of reporters, and it varies. The Santa Cruz paper staff is probably about the same size as ours. Marin is probably still a little bit bigger, but most of those other papers are much smaller than ours in terms of staff size. But they all do have an editor and their own reporters. Yes, there are some operations centralized here as far as, say, the Associated Press stories that go into each of those papers. That's part of what the design center does. You know, they'll pick that with some input from the editors, usually what runs. So, thank you. Yes.
How do you receive the information from the other communities that you're printing for?
As far as the papers we print in our press,
Yeah, how do you get the information for their papers?
the ones we print on the press, we have a plate room where there's just transmitted electronically right into our. They'll send like basically a PDF of their page, and it'll get printed out our plate machine and placed on the press from there. As far as the ones we design and edit, all of those. Again, all of these different newspapers still have their own editor and their own staffs, and the editor will prepare basically what we call a budget of what's going in their paper that day, and they'll be assigned a designer every day that they'll work with. And we've had about 7 or 8 of those designers that work for us have been with us since we started. They've been, and very thankful for that. But say it might be one person doing news and one person doing sports, and they'll be in touch with the editors, be it Monterey or wherever. And then those people can actually look on their computer and kind of see the pages as they're being built and check them for mistakes and the time we have to do that sort of thing, which is a fault of the whole system, I'll admit. But yeah, that's how. Yes?
You said hopefully that we will have an ER Sports Hall of Fame this coming year. What are the factors that will influence whether that occurs or not?
Number one, the guy in charge needs to get in the phone and make a couple calls and get it squared away. That's the big one. We want to go back to the Elks Lodge. Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah.
And also put a definite time limit in the letter of the awardees.
Last one ran a little long, didn't it?
Well, the high school kids,
Yeah.
that may be the thrill of the lifetime for them, and they deserve some time
Yeah.
in front of the audience rather than just having their names read so quickly.
Right. No, that's a good point. We had, and I've only been to the one because the next year was COVID and we haven't been able to do it since then, but we had it was amazing. We had, I think, almost 500 people there that night. And, wow.
It was a better one than a few of the others, much better.
And it was at the fairgrounds. And then we had to put away all the tables. So yeah, I want to go back to the Elks Lodge. Thank you. You'll be there, I hope. So.
Yes.
Okay.
I hope so.
See, this just saved me a phone call. Now I know we have. Thank you. Yes.
Do you have any ideas on how to attract younger audience?
I'm all ears if you.
Look at this audience, I'd say the average age is 60.
We, the years I was running the design center, every day people would show up, they'd go to the circulation department to put a stop in the paper or pay a bill or whatever. Every day some of them would take a wrong turn and end up at my desk. And after about 2 years I noticed I've yet to see a person younger than me. And that was concerning to me at the time. And there are several here, thankfully. But we try different things, and then we try different things some more. I mean, sports definitely gets younger people looking at the paper. We've got one sports writer right now, his name's Justin Couchot, and my God, he is so proficient and working so hard to cover as much as he can. Whereas we had 3 sports writers up until just a couple years ago. And then a bean counter noticed, you're the only paper in Northern California with more than 1 sports writer, and most don't even have any. You can't have 3, and so then we're down to 1. But that's a big way. We're looking at trying to do more things with arts and entertainment and music. You know, that has helped some. Different times we've tried, and having Ed Booth helps because here's a guy who's grew up here, been to school here, and has kids in the education system, and he's writing about education now. I think that's going to be a big thing for us too.
What makes the newspaper money?
Well, historically it was advertising, which not nearly to the degree that it did. The subscription costs are higher now. That's certainly helping. But in our case here in Chico, you know, we're doing a lot of work. You know, we're doing a lot of work that other newspapers aren't paying to do anymore on their own. They're paying us to do it, you know, including the printing on our press, which that's huge. You know, to have your own newspaper press right now, you know, the Chronicle doesn't have their own press anymore. They send it to another place in the Bay Area to print. But we actually, our company owns one in the Bay Area and this one up here. And Reading used to be our backup. We had an agreement with the Reading Record Searchlight that if their press went down or our press went down, we'd print each other's paper, which we did print theirs a couple times. But now they don't have a press. We're printing theirs too. So Marysville's kind of our, Marysville or our Bay Area press are our backups right now. Yeah.
What do you think realistically is the future of print journalism? And what about the growing arena of nonprofit journalism, Tom Field writes for EdSource?
Yeah. That's a really good question because to me, you know, like the example I just brought up, I thought that story needed to be told. And I think there are times when it makes more sense than it used to basically forge a partnership that way. And EdSource is a nonprofit. We can run any story they run. Any newspaper can run any story they run. They do, you know, we can't grab it before they run it. You know, this story in particular, we had an agreement. You're going to put it online at midnight, and we're going to put it online at 5 minutes after midnight. And from there on, we're always going to have them. But opportunities like that, you know, I think are big. Because a lot of the people working for nonprofits are people like Tom Peel, who were just, you know, the best of the best working in the newspaper world up until then. But as far as how long print's going to last, I don't know. Another 10 years, I hope, 20. There are, you see some signs of it, some area now that aren't printing. But I don't know. I don't want to be alive a day where I can't still pick up a newspaper and read it. Yes, sir.
Yes, you've spoken very pleasantly about local effects and local coverage. But I just wanted to make a mention that we're new to the area, and you have very nice international and national news. And I think you're the principal source for many people here in the community for that. And I just wanted to compliment you.
I appreciate that, because that's one I don't hear a lot, honestly. I get more complaints about the AP stories being biased than I do our own work, frankly. And but I appreciate that, because you know, some people wonder, should local newspapers be doing this? Should we be running Associated Press stories at all? But to hear, you know, there are still readers that look to us for that. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this around a little bit.
Okay.
You the question, what are you doing for bringing younger people in? I think everyone in this room is responsible for doing that. I cut things out and send them to my grandchildren. I cut things out and take them to my grandchildren. If you want somebody to read something in print, you got to put it in front of them so that they know to do it.
But you got to get the phone out of their hand.
Everybody in here can do that.
I appreciate that. And it's, for a few years in the Bay Area, when I was working at the Chronicle, I was doing some outside work with a sports magazine that started in the East Bay. It's still going. It's called Sports Stars Magazine. It's all high school sports. And the first few times we printed, and we'd go out to a De La Salle football game or some event that was going on down there, the look in kids' faces when they picked that up and looked at it, their jaw was just dropping. It's like, wow, this is like a really nice looking big time magazine, and it's about us and people we play against. And I think just the exposure to it, if you're doing a good job, is huge.
If you know your next door neighbor's kid was an Inspire, and they don't get the paper, cut it out, put it in their mailbox.
We've had a lot of stories about Inspire lately too. A lot of the things they're doing. Yes?
Why do you run one page of the Paradise Post each week?
Oh, I wish it was its own paper. I really do. There's a...
But, does that do any good? One page of...
There are reasons that have to do with advertising and keeping the masthead alive, and I think I'm not an expert in this end of the operation to any degree, but I think we get some legal advertising because we still have a paper called the Paradise Post. I wish we had a regular paper called the honestly, the fire. Way down the list of tragedies about that fire, we've had a newspaper and nobody to deliver it to anymore, and no businesses to advertise in it for the most part anymore. But we want to keep it alive, and hopefully it can, re-emerge someday.
Hang on to the masthead is what you're trying to do.
Hang on, exactly, and that's going on to different degrees in some of our other newspapers up and down the state and country, too. Yeah.
Does NIE still exist?
I'm sorry?
Does NIE still exist? Newspapers in Education?
I think so. Yeah, I'm familiar with them, but it's just occurring to me, wow, I haven't seen anything from them lately, but I think they do. I'm curious. I'll give that a look. Thank you. Yes?
I love ER.
Thank you.
And I look forward to your editorials because they're very personal, and some have made me laugh, some have made me cry.
I cry writing them sometimes. Like this week, I haven't written one yet. Like, what am I going to write about? Maybe I'll write about this. I don't know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The only criticism I have is why in the world did you switch the Sunday crossword puzzles to the LA Times?
I've got an easy answer to that. That was made pay grades above me. That kind of. I don't pick the crosswords, and I first heard about that when people started complaining. That and because I know better than to mess with the crosswords. My dad's 97, and he still takes the paper just to do the crossword. He tells me that. That and comics. You don't mess with comics if people like the comics.
Getting back to the New York Times.
Okay, I will bring that up because it would make my life easier. I think. Thank you. Oh yes.
Offer something on a lighter note. In light of our audience here today, I just want to compliment you on the way you're handling obituaries. They're beautiful, they're interesting.
You're talking about the paid obituaries, or the ones that kind of look like the ads that run, or the ones we write, or?
Well, the ones that people submit. They're really nice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. When I started in Corning, every obituary ran on the front page. If you died in Corning, you got your name on the front page of the paper. And sometimes I look back and I think that was genius, and I wonder should we do that again? I mean, and sometimes we do. We had Howard Slater's, I think, on the front page today.
Okay, this is a bit mundane, but before the pandemic, I dropped by the office now and then and pick up one of the end rolls.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And during the pandemic, couldn't do that anymore.
Oh, yes, you can. No, you still can.
Because nobody was there at the door for me to talk to.
Nobody's at the door, but here's the secret for that. If you go around to the west side of the building, kind of right in the middle of the building, there's a door with a doorbell. If you ring that, somebody will come out and you can get one of those. And I'm always amazed how many, I think I could tell this story. It's like a year or so ago, Casey Reynolds, our vice mayor, emailed me or called me and said, really important, really, I got to talk to you right away. I'm like, oh wow, what's going on? He goes, we're out of those rolls, and my daughter needs some rolls to draw on. I'm like, okay, here, we'll work something out. I'll get you some. So, yes.
You used to have a morgue, and I understand it was in the closet. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
It's still there?
We've got the whole front room that all of you who have ever been in our building have been into. It's empty now. It's empty now, except for an old linotype machine that sits there and a couple of desks. But anything we had as far as back copies of the paper or our personal, clip file that we had before there was an internet, that's still there. We still have that, and from time to time, if people want to look something up, and if you get a hold of me, we can usually find a time where I can meet you there for that sort of thing. Yeah. Yes.
From Chico Heritage, so this is a plug. We have a huge amount of old papers of Butte County, especially Chico area, and for research purposes, if we didn't have access to those, and they were given to us by the museum here, and they were given them from the university, who got them from the newspaper way back.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, nobody has thrown them away. But without that resource, we couldn't do much of what we do as far as research locally.
Yeah, it's
newspapers throughout our history.
This has come up in another hat I wear is our Northern California editors group. I pull together a meeting with all the editors every couple of weeks, and we just talked about what other issues or things we're working on together or whatever. But that's been a big one for all of them. It's like the office got closed, and all of a sudden I'm the person trying to decide what to do with all of our back copies and all of this equipment we have, and it doesn't all fit in my home. What can I do? And we're trying to play some catch up on that. But thank you for taking it, because I agree. It's like once that stuff's gone, we're not going to be able to get it back. We do have microfilm. I think the county library, still has microfilm of all our papers going back a ways too. But yeah,
A lot of us are like you, though. We want that paper in our hand, not on a screen.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll keep up that fight until they make us stop. Well, yes.
Just as a side note to that, if people are interested, I think Randy's the one that usually Randy Taylor posts articles from those newspapers online. So if people want to go to the Chico Heritage or like Chico Heritage online, they'll just see some of those articles that are interesting.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anybody else? Bob? They're clapping for you, Bob.
I just want to thank you for doing this. I arrived in Chico in '72, and I grew up in Philadelphia, so I'm well grounded in newspapers. And I started here with Bill Lee. And as a Democrat, God, they take our Tories. Top of the full front page.
Thank you.
My husband Norm and I value both the print edition and the e-line edition, and your addition of your new writers who are veterans.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, and thanks for reading that. And
Fun local newspaper.
yeah, it's I'm more excited about the staff right now than I've been since the one I inherited and ran off, I guess. But it was, thank you.
We're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.